Now, I apologize for the informality of the background at the moment, but as you can see, I have a new hat, and it has quite an interesting story behind it, so I thought I'd talk about it for a short time. So what is the interesting story behind this cap? Well, this is actually a gift from a friend of mine who happens to be in the, former Soviet Union around 1991-92 on a humanitarian mission. She was actually in Belarus at the time. And as she told the story to me, it happened that the organization she was with, they had at one point chartered a private helicopter. They're going to go, from one city to another to do whatever mission they had to take care of. Bit of a spanner in the works, though. The helicopter idea ended up falling through. They did not get to actually charter that helicopter, and they were, as a result of this, largely left stranded where they were. No means of transportation to the area they needed to get to. Well, again, think 91, 92, things in the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union aren't exactly in the greatest of states, and organization, particularly in the military, is kind of falling apart. The hat is slowly sliding down because, as you can see, it's a little big for me. But it just so happened that one of the members of the office that this group was with, they happened to be friends with a local air base commander, the former Red Air Force. And so, of course, what do? They give the Air Base commander a ring, and they say, well, we had a helicopter, now we don't. We kind of want to get to this other place. Can you arrange for something? And arrange for something they did. They actually got to arrange for a private military, an attack helicopter of some sort, to fly them from one location to the other. And my friend, she's a bit younger at this time, and she got to chatting with the pilot of this military, this army helicopter, and they struck up a bit of a friendship, and towards the end, he actually gave her a gift. He took off his cap, and he handed it to her. Of course, she protested against it. She says, "No, you can't give me your cap. It's part of your uniform. Won't you get in trouble if you give this to me?" But of course, late 91, early 92, whenever it was exactly, hammer and sickle is, it's a little outdated, isn't it now? So he explains, it's an outdated uniform. New boss. It's no longer relevant. You might say it became old hat. Okay, I'm sorry. But anyways, the uniform was no longer really relevant. It was no longer needed. It became, outdated. And so he passed off the hat, and she took it home with her, and eventually it wound up in my hands here. But it tells a rather, the rather interesting story there. It tells a rather important lesson, I think, because, not only, of course, are militaries, as, extraordinarily complicated institutions, complicated organizations, very vast organizations with, great deal many valuable items just sort of floating around. It's natural that inherently there's always going to be some uniform pieces, some pieces of equipment, military weapons, indeed, that may fall through the cracks, so to say, through issues of corruption and end up, getting sold away, that sort of thing. But when you have a totalitarian, not quite totalitarian towards the end, but, hardly very forgiving in many ways, when you have a hyper-militant, very large, militarized state, centralized state, such as the Soviet Union, that just falls apart, that collapses very quickly, very readily, you take what is inherently going to be a natural but limited little dribble of military equipment sort of falling off the wagon, and it just becomes very porous. You open the floodgates. All of a sudden, every single individual military commander, every single air base commander, when you overnight remove their boss, you say, the high command that you used to answer to, the entire chain of command above you, all the people who gave you all those stars and decorations on your shoulder, they're no longer there. They disappear. You're now part of, the independent Belarusian military. You're now part of the Ukrainian army. And these institutions, they don't have commanders assigned. The governments are scrambling to figure out what's going on. There's a sense of confusion that just pervades these environments. And so individual air base or army base commanders, they're largely, at least temporarily, left to their own devices. And when you have individual lower-ranking generals and majors, people like that, who suddenly have commands over very vast quantities of military equipment, of soldiers, of value, of assets underneath them, and no one to really answer to, well, again, you can see how the floodgates really open to all sorts of issues of corruption and whatnot. Honestly, it's probably one of the only good lessons to have ever come out of a Nicolas Cage film, Lord of War, how it's about an arms dealer and he's going around in the former Soviet Union and he's buying up all these different weapons because there's just a bunch of, military commanders who, their bosses are no longer in existence, and they have nothing else to do, so they're just selling off hordes of these weapons. Now, of course, in this case in particular, it was rather harmless. It was just an airman thinking, well, this cap is no longer relevant, and no one's going to yell at me so if I get rid of it, so hey, cute American girl, here, take a hat, why not? That's rather innocent. That doesn't really, end up harming anyone all too much. But, if he had, say, his service pistol, an AK-47, a tank, an attack helicopter, well, we can see how this lack of governmental oversight might rather rapidly lead to a problem. And that's where we reach a rather modern political point. When we think of, say, Russia, Iran, North Korea, China, all of these regimes, or indeed a lot of the ones over in Africa as well, sub-Saharan Africa, we think about these less than savory, rather anti-Western regimes, which just so happen to as well be very highly militant nations with very large supplies of military equipment. Well, for, say, the United States, France, Britain, NATO countries, it wouldn't really, ultimately, I don't think, not that I'm an expert on anything here, it wouldn't be too much of a problem to overnight dismantle these governments, these states. I mean, if the United States wanted to, it could just snap its fingers and Iran would disappear. I mean, is anyone really doubting that other than, the weirdos in the comment section? No, certainly not. But that's not the real problem with these sorts of things. Russia, for example, they're posturing and whatnot. If the United States wanted to, it could probably get rid of Russia fairly easily, but it's not so simple as all of that, because you can collapse a government, sure. You can take the current regime and just snap your fingers and they, largely disappear after a rather short engagement. But it's not just a matter of getting rid of Putin or Xi Jinping or any of these people. It's a matter of what happens to all of the stuff underneath them? See, unless you can fully and totally occupy a nation, which, as we've seen in recent history, is rather expensive and tends to not work too well, all of those weapons, all of that military equipment sort of goes up for grabs, up to, in many ways, the highest bidder. And that's very dangerous, because who knows in the end, if we were to, take out North Korea or Iran or China, any of these people. If the governments were to disappear, who knows who would end up getting their hands on all of that military surplus? Who knows? It could be, terrorist organizations or indeed crazy YouTubers wearing funny hats on the internet. But all the same, again, a fun little story I thought I'd share there, and I do hope we got something out of it. Until the next time, my dear viewers, I am, and I shall remain, your most humble and obedient of servants.